My name is Ryan Mitchell. I am 34 years old and I work as a mechanic in a small town called Riverside in Ohio. I have been hiking and camping in the wilderness for almost 15 years now, and I always believed that the woods were my second home. Something is watching you right now. You cannot see it. You cannot hear it. But it is there, standing in the darkness, waiting for you to close your eyes. This is not a made-up story. This is what happened to me last November, and I have not slept properly since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that dirty blue teddy bear staring at me with its scratched plastic eye. Someone stood inches away from my head while I was sleeping. Someone watched me breathe. Someone wanted me to know they were there. And the worst part is, I never heard them coming. I have seen many strange things during my years of hiking and backpacking. I have found weird tracks in the mud that did not match any animal I knew. I have discovered abandoned campsites where food was still cooking on the fire, but the people were gone. I have heard screams in the middle of the night that could have been mountain lions or could have been something else entirely. But none of those experiences ever made me want to quit this hobby. I always told myself there was a logical explanation for everything. I was wrong. There are some things in this world that have no explanation. There are some things that exist only to remind us that we are never truly alone, even when we think we are. It was the very beginning of winter when this happened. The snow had not started falling heavily yet, but the temperature had dropped so much that the ground was frozen solid. Every step you took made a loud crunching sound that echoed through the empty forest. My buddy Marcus and I decided to do one last weekend trip before the weather became too brutal to enjoy. We chose a state forest about 4 hours north of where we live, a place called Blackwood Reserve. We had been there once before during summer, and we remembered how beautiful and isolated it was. We wanted that isolation again. We wanted to get away from people, away from noise, away from everything. We parked the car at the trailhead around 7 in the morning. The sun was barely up, and our breath came out in thick white clouds. We loaded our heavy backpacks onto our shoulders and started walking. The plan was simple. We would hike off the main trail and go deep into the woods where no one else would be. We did not want to see day hikers or families with children. We did not want to hear people talking or laughing. We just wanted silence and solitude. We wanted to freeze our butts off for a night or two and feel alive. We hiked for most of the day without stopping. The woods were a mix of gray and brown because most of the trees had lost their leaves. Only a few stubborn oaks still held onto their dead brown leaves, which rattled in the cold wind like paper. There were no bugs, no birds, no animals moving around. Just the wind cutting through the bare branches and making a low whistling sound that felt lonely and sad. Around 4 in the afternoon, the sun was already starting to go down. The shadows were getting long and creepy, stretching across the ground like dark fingers reaching for us. We decided it was time to find a spot to camp. We walked for another 30 minutes before we found the perfect location. It was right next to a small creek. The water was icy clear and rushing over smooth gray stones. There was a flat clearing about 20 feet from the water, surrounded by a thick wall of pine trees on 3 sides. It felt secure and protected. I want to be very clear about this part because it is important. We spent a lot of time setting up our camp. We cleared the ground of rocks and sticks. We walked around the entire area looking for firewood. We explored every inch of that clearing multiple times. There was absolutely nothing there except dirt, dead pine needles, and small rocks. I am certain of this because I remember thinking how clean and empty the spot was. We set up our small 2-person tent with the door facing the creek so we could hear the water while we fell asleep. The tent was tight and cramped, but that was good because our body heat would keep us warmer. By the time we got the fire going, it was completely dark. The sky was black and filled with stars, more stars than you could ever see in the city. We cooked some freeze-dried beef stew, which actually tastes pretty good when you are starving and cold. We sat on a log we had dragged over near the fire pit and ate our dinner in comfortable silence. We stayed up until maybe 10 at night, just talking about regular stuff like work and relationships and video games. It was a good time. The fire was dying down to glowing orange coals, and the cold was starting to creep through our heavy winter coats. "I am done for tonight," Marcus said, standing up and stretching his arms over his head. "It is way too cold out here." "Yeah, go ahead," I told him. "I am going to make sure this fire is completely out before I come in." Marcus crawled into the tent and I heard him settling into his sleeping bag. I stayed outside for another 10 minutes, pouring water from the creek onto the dying embers and kicking dirt over them until there was no glow left. I did not want to start a forest fire. Before going into the tent, I scanned the area with my headlamp one last time. The beam of light cut through the darkness, hitting the trees and the creek and the ground all around us. I saw nothing unusual, just the woods, silent and empty. I crawled into my sleeping bag and zipped myself in tight. Marcus was already snoring softly, and I knew I was the last one awake. It took me a long time to fall asleep because the ground was hard and uncomfortable even with my sleeping pad. But eventually, the peaceful sound of the rushing creek put me to sleep. I slept deeply that night, which is very unusual for me when I am camping. Normally, every little sound wakes me up. A twig snapping, a leaf rustling, anything at all. But that night I heard nothing. No footsteps, no animals moving around, no sounds at all. Just perfect silence. Looking back now, I realize how strange that was. The forest is never completely silent. There is always something making noise. But that night it was like the whole world had gone quiet. I woke up around 6 in the morning. It was that gray early light where you can see things but everything looks washed out and dull. The air inside the tent was freezing cold, and I could see my breath coming out in thick white puffs. I really needed to use the bathroom, so I tried to unzip my sleeping bag as quietly as possible so I would not wake Marcus. I sat up slowly, put my cold boots on my feet, and reached for the tent door. The zipper made that loud ripping sound that seems to echo for miles in the quiet woods. I pushed the door flap open and looked outside. My heart did not just drop. It completely stopped beating for a moment. I forgot how to breathe. I forgot how to think. All I could do was stare at what was sitting in front of me. There was a teddy bear sitting on a large flat rock directly in front of our tent. It was maybe 6 feet away from the door, close enough that I could see every terrible detail. It was not a new toy. It was an old, dirty, blue stuffed bear. It looked like one of those Care Bears from the 1980s, but the symbol on its stomach was completely worn off and covered in dark grime. The fur was wet and matted with mud and dirt. One of its plastic eyes was badly scratched, giving it a blind, dead look. But the worst part, the part that made my blood turn to ice, was how it was positioned. It was not lying on its side like someone had dropped it there. It was sitting perfectly upright with its legs sticking out straight and its arms resting at its sides. And its head was turned slightly so it was facing the door of our tent. It was looking right at me. I could not move. I literally could not make my body do anything. My brain was trying to understand how this thing had gotten there. I had walked past that rock dozens of times yesterday. I had sat near it while we were setting up camp. I had shined my flashlight on it last night before going to bed. That bear was not there. I am absolutely certain it was not there. I backed into the tent slowly, my breathing getting fast and shallow. My hands were shaking as I reached over and grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. I shook him hard. "Marcus, wake up right now," I whispered. He groaned and rubbed his eyes. "What is wrong? What time is it?" "Just sit up and look outside," I said. My voice was trembling. Marcus sat up, looking annoyed at being woken up so early. He leaned forward and looked out the open tent door. I watched his face change. First there was sleepy irritation, then confusion, and then pure terror. His eyes went wide and his mouth fell open. "What is that thing?" he hissed. "Did you put that there?" He looked at me with fear in his eyes. "No," I told him. "I just woke up." I opened the door and it was already sitting there. Marcus looked back at the bear, then slowly scanned the tree line around us. "Is someone out there watching us?" We both sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever, just listening. The only sound was the creak behind us. It was maddening. If there had been a twig snap or a laugh or footsteps or anything, at least we would have known where the person was. But there was nothing. Just silence, we need to leave right now, Marcus said. His voice was shaking badly. I grabbed my hunting knife from my backpack and we both crawled out of the tent carefully. I expected someone to jump out from behind a tree screaming at us, but nobody did. The woods were empty and silent. We walked up to the bear slowly. Up close, it was even more disgusting. It smelled like mildew and rotting leaves and something else I could not identify. It was soaked through with dirty water, but the rock it was sitting on was completely dry. Someone had placed it there carefully and deliberately. Look at the ground around it, I said quietly. The ground was frozen solid and covered with layers of dead leaves and pine needles. We searched desperately for footprints or boot marks or any sign of who had been there. But because the ground was so hard and covered in debris, we could not find any tracks. Someone had to put this here, Marcus said. His voice cracked with fear. They had to walk right up to our tent in the middle of the night while we were sleeping. That was the thought that made me want to throw up. The tent walls are thin fabric. Someone had been standing just inches away from our heads while we slept. They stood there in the freezing darkness and carefully placed this disgusting toy on the rock. They positioned it perfectly to face our door, so it would be the first thing we saw when we woke up. They did not steal our gear. They did not attack us. They did not make any noise at all. They just left us a message. They wanted us to know they had been there. They wanted us to know we were being watched. Forget breakfast, I said. Pack everything up now. We tore that camp down faster than we had ever done anything in our lives. Usually it takes us 30 minutes to pack up properly. We did it in 5 minutes. We shoved everything into our backpacks without folding or rolling anything. The whole time we were packing, I kept looking at the trees around us. The woods felt different now. Yesterday they felt empty and peaceful. Now they felt crowded and dangerous. I kept seeing movement in the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to look, it was just a branch moving in the wind. We left the blue teddy bear sitting on that rock. Neither of us wanted to touch it. The hike back to the car was the longest walk of my life. We practically ran through the woods. We kept looking over our shoulders every few seconds, expecting to see someone following us. Every time the wind blew some dry leaves across the ground, we both jumped with fear. We did not talk. We just moved as fast as we could. When we finally reached the car and got inside and locked all the doors, the relief was overwhelming. But then the terrible questions started coming. I know Marcus did not do this. He was asleep before me and I woke up before him. Plus, I have known him for 12 years. He cannot act that well. He was genuinely terrified. And I know I did not do it. That leaves only one explanation. Someone else was out there in those woods with us. They probably watched us hike in. They probably watched us set up camp. And then, at some point in the frozen middle of the night, they walked silently into our campsite. They stood over us while we were unconscious and helpless. They placed that filthy little bear on the rock and positioned it perfectly. And then they backed away into the darkness and probably watched us wake up from somewhere in the tree line. We never heard them. Not a single sound. That is what terrifies me the most. They were that close and we never knew. I have not gone backpacking since that night. I still go on short hikes during the day on popular trails where there are lots of other people around. But I do not think I can ever sleep in a tent in the deep woods again. Every time I think about it, I see that dirty blue bear staring at me with its one scratched eye, and I wonder if whoever put it there is still out in those woods, waiting for the next hikers to come along, waiting for someone else to watch while they sleep. My name is Derek Collins. I am 31 years old and I work at a warehouse in a small industrial area outside of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. I spend my nights loading trucks and driving forklifts until my body feels like it is going to break apart. They were not trying to help me. They were hunting me. I was supposed to die that night on that frozen road, and nobody would have ever found my body. The police told me later what they discovered hidden in the trees. They found a pile of heavy rocks and a coil of thick rope. They were going to beat me unconscious, tie me up, and leave me in the woods to freeze to death while they drove away in my car. I escaped by seconds. If my tires had not caught that small patch of dry pavement, if I had hesitated for just one more moment, I would be dead right now. And the worst part is that they are still out there. The police never caught them. They could be waiting on that same road tonight, lying in the snow, pretending to be hurt, waiting for the next person with a kind heart to stop and help. I work at a distribution center about 45 minutes from my house. The job is brutal and exhausting. I spend 8 hours lifting heavy boxes and moving pallets with a forklift. My back always hurts and my muscles always ache. But the paycheck is decent, so I keep showing up. My shift ends at 2 in the morning. If you have ever driven home at that hour in the middle of winter, you know exactly how lonely the roads can get. There are no other cars. There are no lights except your headlights. It feels like you are the last person left alive on the entire planet. The darkness surrounds you completely, and the silence makes you feel very small and very alone. This happened 3 years ago during a particularly brutal winter. The snow had been falling since noon that day, and by the time I clocked out at 2 in the morning, the roads were a complete disaster. My car was an old beat-up 1998 Honda Civic. It was not exactly built for blizzard conditions, so I knew I had to drive very slowly and carefully. Usually, I take the interstate to get home because it is faster and safer. But that night, the radio said there was a jackknifed semi-truck blocking 2 lanes about 10 miles up the highway. Traffic was completely stopped for miles. I was so exhausted that my eyes were burning. My back was throbbing with pain and I just wanted to get into my warm bed as quickly as possible. So I made the decision that almost cost me my life. I decided to take the back roads instead. The back road cut through miles of empty farmland and thick heavy woods. During the summer, it is actually a very nice and peaceful drive. But during the winter at 2 in the morning, it is nothing but a black void. You cannot see anything beyond the reach of your headlights. The darkness swallows everything. I was maybe 15 minutes into the drive when the nightmare began. The heater was blasting hot air, but I was still shivering because the cold was so intense. The snow was blowing horizontally across my windshield, making it almost impossible to see anything ahead. My wipers were struggling to keep up with the heavy snowfall. That is when I saw something strange on the side of the road. About 50 yards ahead on the right shoulder, there was a dark lump in the snowbank. At first I thought it was just a pile of garbage or maybe a dead deer, but as I got closer, the shape became terrifyingly clear. It was a person. It looked like a man wearing a dark flannel jacket, lying face down, half buried in the snow that the plows had pushed to the side of the road. My stomach dropped immediately. My first thought was that someone had lost control of their car, crashed into the ditch, and tried to walk for help before collapsing from the cold. It happens more often than people realize during bad winters. I slowed my car down and looked around. I did not see any wrecked vehicles anywhere, but the ditch was very deep so a car could have been hidden down there in the darkness. I pulled my car over to the left side of the road, keeping some distance between me and the body. I rolled down my window and the freezing wind immediately blasted into my face. "Hey," I yelled as loud as I could. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" The wind snatched my voice away like it was nothing. The body did not move at all. It just lay there in the snow, completely still. Now I have heard all the warnings about not stopping for strangers on lonely roads. I have watched the news stories about people getting robbed or worse when they pull over to help someone. But when you actually see a human being lying face down in the snow during freezing temperatures, your natural human instinct takes over. You cannot just drive away and let someone freeze to death. At least that is what I thought at the time. I put the car in park but left the engine running so the heater would stay on. I turned on my hazard lights so any other cars would see me. I grabbed my phone and tried to dial 911, but I had 0 bars of service. Of course, there was no signal out here in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight I always keep in my glove box and stepped out of the car. The cold hit me like a physical punch to my entire body. The wind was howling so loud that I could barely hear myself think. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted again as I walked slowly across the icy road toward the body. I kept my flashlight pointed at the figure in the snow. I was being careful, walking slowly, watching where I stepped on the slippery ice. I was about 15 feet away from the body when something happened that made my blood turn to ice. The body suddenly moved, but it did not move like an injured person would. An injured person would groan and struggle and slowly try to get up. This was different. This was wrong. The man sat up violently, snapping his entire upper body straight up like a puppet being yanked by strings. Then he turned his head and looked directly at me. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s. His face was not pale or blue from the cold like it should have been. It was flushed and alive and healthy. He was not wearing gloves and his hands looked perfectly fine. He was not shivering at all, even though he had supposedly been lying in the freezing snow. Everything about this was wrong. "Help me," he screamed loudly. "My leg is broken. I think I cannot walk. Please help me." I stopped walking immediately. Something deep inside me was screaming that this was a trap. The way he yelled for help did not sound right. It was not panicked or desperate like a real injured person would sound. It sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced saying those exact words many times before. It was too loud, too theatrical, too fake. And his eyes were not looking at me. They were not looking at my flashlight either. His eyes were locked on something behind me. He was staring at my car. Specifically, he was staring at the driver's side door that I had left wide open. "Where is your car?" I asked him as I took a step backward. "Did you crash somewhere?" The man pointed vaguely into the dark woods behind him without even looking in that direction. "It is back there in the trees," he yelled. "Just come over here and help me stand up. I cannot walk on my broken leg." But as he was saying this, I watched him moving his legs. He was shifting them around in the snow, digging his heels in and tensing his muscles. He was moving them just fine. There was nothing wrong with his legs at all. He looked exactly like a runner getting ready to explode off the starting blocks of a race. He was preparing to sprint. He was preparing to chase me. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. This was not from the cold. This was that ancient primal alarm bell that goes off in your brain when you are in serious danger. Every cell in my body was screaming at me that I was the prey and this man was the predator. I took another step backward toward my car. "I am going to drive up the road until I get a phone signal," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Then I will call an ambulance for you." The man's face changed instantly. The fake friendly mask of a helpless victim disappeared completely. His expression became dark and angry and threatening. "Just come over here and help me up," he shouted, his voice dropping lower and becoming aggressive and demanding. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. Behind the man, past the snowbank, deep in the dark tree line, the beam of my headlights caught a reflection. It was not the reflection of animal eyes. It was metal, maybe a belt buckle or maybe a zipper on a jacket. Then two dark shadows separated themselves from the trees. They had been crouching in the bushes the entire time, waiting and watching. Now they stood up tall, and I could see they were both large men dressed completely in black with dark hoods pulled up over their heads. They had been hiding there waiting for me to get close enough to the first guy. They had been waiting to trap me. "Run!" The guy in the snowbank suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs. But he was not screaming at me to run. He was screaming at the two men in the trees. He was giving them the signal to attack. The guy in the snowbank scrambled to his feet instantly. There was no broken leg. There was no injury at all. He moved with perfect speed and agility as he lunged toward me. The two figures from the trees sprinted out onto the road, cutting across the ice to get on either side of me. They were trying to surround me. They were trying to cut off my escape. I did not think. My body just reacted on pure survival instinct. I spun around and ran as fast as I could toward my car. My boots slipped on the black ice and I almost fell face first onto the frozen pavement. I caught myself with my hands, feeling the ice burn my palms, and pushed off hard. I could hear their boots crunching on the snow behind me. Heavy, fast footsteps getting closer and closer. They were not yelling anymore. They had gone completely silent. That was almost scarier than the screaming. They were just hunting me now like wolves chasing down a deer. My car was only 20 feet away, but it felt like a mile. I could hear the guy from the snowbank getting closer with every step. I could hear his heavy breathing right behind me. I threw myself at the open driver's side door and grabbed the frame to swing my body inside. Just as I grabbed the door handle to slam it shut, a hand slammed onto the window glass. The guy from the snowbank was right there, inches away from me. He grabbed the top of the door frame and started trying to rip the door back open. I pulled with every bit of strength I had left in my body. Through the gap in the door I could see his face. He was grinning at me with a manic, crazy smile, his eyes wild with adrenaline and excitement. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could, catching his fingers for a split second before he yanked them back with a scream of pain. I hit the lock button immediately and heard all the doors click locked. The other two guys had reached the car now. One of them kicked the rear passenger door so hard the whole car shook. The other one started smashing something heavy against the passenger window. It was either a tire iron or a large rock. The glass cracked but did not break. I stomped on the gas pedal as hard as I could. The wheels spun uselessly for one terrifying second. The car did not move at all. The tires just whined against the ice while the traction control light flashed on my dashboard. The guy on my side started punching the driver window over and over, screaming horrible things at me. Then finally the tires caught a small patch of dry pavement. The car lurched forward violently, fishtailing hard to the left. I almost hit the guy on the driver's side, but he jumped back into the snowbank just in time to avoid getting crushed. I straightened the steering wheel and pressed the gas pedal all the way to the floor. I did not look in the rearview mirror until I was at least a mile down the road. When I finally looked, there was nothing behind me except darkness and swirling snow. I drove straight to the state police station, which was another 20 minutes away. I ran inside looking like a complete lunatic, shaking and gasping for breath. I told the officer everything that happened and they sent patrol cars out immediately. The police did not catch them. By the time the officers arrived at that spot on the road, the three men were gone. They had disappeared into the night like ghosts. But the officers told me later what they found at the scene. They found footprints in the snow, 3 distinct sets of boot prints that confirmed my story was true. And they found something else hidden behind the tree line, right where the 2 other guys had been hiding. They found a pile of large heavy rocks and a coil of thick rope. The police officer was very direct with me about what he thought. He said those men were not just trying to steal my car. If they only wanted the car, they would have pulled me out and driven away. The rocks and the rope meant something much worse. They wanted to take me with them or tie me up and leave me in the freezing woods to die slowly while they used my car for whatever horrible things they had planned next. I do not take back roads anymore. Ever. I do not care if there is traffic. I do not care if the highway is completely closed. I will sit in my car for hours before I ever drive down a lonely dark road again. And if I ever see someone lying in the snow, I will call 911 and keep driving without stopping. I know that sounds cold and heartless, but I saw the look on that man's face when I hesitated. He was not looking for help. He was looking for a victim, and I will never let myself become one. I never thought a simple evening could turn into a nightmare that would stay with me for the rest of my life. My name is Aisha Farrow. I'm 31, originally from the rugged hills of Northumberland, and I work as a nurse at a local hospital in Edinburgh, Scotland. I've always been independent, careful, and cautious, but that night in December, all of my instincts, all of my training, and every ounce of awareness I had were tested in a way I could never have imagined. It was late December during the strict lockdown in the UK, and the streets of my small neighborhood were unusually empty. My friend and colleague, Laura, who lived just a few houses down from me, was also heading out for her evening shift at the hospital. The main roads were closed due to construction and restrictions, so the only way to reach the hospital from my house was a narrow, quiet back lane that cut through a small row of older homes. I had lived in the area for a few years and had always felt safe. Until that night, our neighbor had rented out the house next to mine about a year ago. I had never met him properly, but recently I noticed what appeared to be a house guest staying there. A man, likely in his late 30s, would sometimes be outside, staring in a way that made my skin crawl. For days, I avoided eye contact, always feeling watched. That evening, I stepped out to unlock my car, dressed in my warm padded coat and thick trousers to ward off the icy December wind. That's when he spoke for the first time. "Evening, Miss Farrow. I just wanted to say you look amazing tonight," he said, his voice deep, slow, and strange, thick with an accent I couldn't place. My heart froze. I had never even spoken to him, and now here he was, looking me up and down as if I were an object. I froze, unable to respond, my stomach twisting, my hands trembling. The wind howled around us, but his gaze was unblinking, relentless, and chilling. I jumped into my car so quickly that I nearly dropped my glasses, my pulse racing and nausea crawling up my throat. For a moment, he stayed where he was, staring as I started the engine. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm myself. I realized I had left my phone inside the house. My husband was still at work, so there was no one around who could make me feel safe. I debated whether to risk going back in or to drive without it. My instinct told me to be fast, so I jumped out, ran inside, grabbed the phone, and ran back out. To my relief, he was gone. I locked the car, my hands shaking, and started driving along the quiet lane. The air was frosty and still, the road barely lit by sparse street lamps. I felt exposed, every shadow on the side of the road twisting into potential threats. After a few minutes, my car began to shudder. I pulled over, my chest tight with anxiety, and stepped out. That's when I noticed my back left tire. It wasn't just flat, it had been slashed. My breath came in harsh, visible puffs in the freezing air. I had my phone in my hand, ready to call for help, when a car appeared behind me, its headlights blinding in the dark lane. I instinctively turned my face, squinting against the lights. I heard the slam of a door, and before I could react, a gloved hand clamped over my mouth, cutting off my scream. Panic surged through me as I struggled, my eyes filling with tears. I could see my breath steaming in the cold night air, my heart hammering in my chest. A voice, low and chilling, whispered into my ear. "Right, Miss Farrow, hands behind your back." It was him, the same man from before. I was frozen, but my survival instinct kicked in. I obeyed, raising my hands. The gloved hand moved away from my mouth, replaced by a rough rag that gagged me. I felt cold parcel tape being pulled tight around my wrists, securing my hands behind me. He forced me to turn, pressing me against the back of my car. My legs were taped, my mouth gagged, and my mind raced to figure out a way out. Every second felt like an eternity. His eyes were fixed on mine, empty yet terrifying, the kind of look that makes your entire body tense with fear. I realized that if I didn't act fast, I could be trapped. As he walked to the front of the car to switch the engine off, I noticed a small gap in how he had taped my ankles. I kicked hard, once, twice, and felt the tape snap enough to move my feet. When he returned to check, I swung my leg up with everything I had, connecting with his groin. He yelped, bent over, and I didn't hesitate. I kicked him square in the face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Shaking, I moved to the front of the car, still bound but regaining some control. I peeled the tape from my mouth with trembling fingers and chewed through the parcels on my wrists. My heart was racing, my legs cold, my mind in shock. I grabbed my phone from the ground and called the police immediately. My colleague at the hospital answered moments later, panic in their voice, and I explained what had just happened. Within minutes, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. Alec, the name he had used, though I later learned it wasn't real, was arrested on the spot. He was charged with attempted kidnapping and assault. The investigation revealed that he had been illegally staying in the neighbor's house, and he had been watching me for days, even tracking my deliveries and learning my routines. The trauma of that night didn't leave me immediately. I started taking self-defense classes and kickboxing lessons, which I believe saved me. Counseling and therapy helped me process the fear, but the memory of his unblinking stare, his gloved hands, and the icy December night will never fade. I have moved on, my husband and I rebuilt our sense of safety, and I returned to work, but I am forever changed. I now know that danger can hide behind seemingly normal faces, in familiar places, and that your instincts are the most important weapon you have. Trust cautiously, be aware, and never underestimate how quickly a nightmare can turn real. The end.